Thank you for joining the bi-weekly Dad Zoom call. Tonight's program is on housing and alternative living arrangements. And I'm thrilled that we have a number of our seasoned Special Fathers Network mentor fathers to share their thoughts and their experiences with us. Just a brief word about the Special Fathers Network. It's a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. One of the things that we do are the bi-weekly Zoom calls. Another thing that we do is host a weekly podcast. It's known as the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. They come out on Fridays about weekly. The most recent episode, I think, was something in the order of 134. So we've been at it for about 3 years. There's some of the more inspirational stories. And interestingly, each of our presenting fathers tonight was a podcast dad as well. So I'll make reference to their numbers as we get into the program. So the format for tonight's program is that I'll ask each of the presenting fathers to make a brief self-introduction, which would include where they live, the nature of their family, their child or children's special needs, and what their connection is to housing. And then once the brief self-introductions are done, what I'll do is I'll circle back with a round of questions or two. And then at the end, we'll talk about resources. So to lead us off, I'm going to go in order of how they were podcast dads. And one of our podcast dads is Brian Rubin, who was podcast dad number 27. So Brian, the Zoom stage is yours.
Great, so I'm first. Okay. Brian Rubin live in Lincolnshire, Illinois, which is a north suburb of Chicago. Uh, Married for 43 years. My middle son has autism, just turned 40 last week. Uh, Professionally, I'm a special needs planning attorney. Um, We've worn a lot of hats over the years. Past president at the Illinois Arc of Illinois, and Mitchell was served for years by an agency called Clearbrook, a very large agency in Chicagoland area. I've been on that board of directors now, just turning 32 years. I've been on that board of directors. Uh, we operate approximately 65 group homes, and we operate four ICFDDs, the larger facilities for individuals with significant medical issues and things like that. Uh, do the early intervention program for Northwest Cook. Uh, we serve about 8,000 individuals in the general area. For home-based support services in Illinois, we go out about 6, 7 counties. Uh, Mitch went through special ed, CEDAL, Special District Lake County. Actually, I was the founding chair of the foundation for CEDAL up there. Uh, he was aging out, and I remember the then executive director at Clearbrook, Carl Lamel, said to me, "You should talk about him moving into residential." This was uh, before Governor Blagojevich, which was when you were able to make contributions to the right state rep or state senator, and you got housing, and you didn't wait in line before he messed that up. And I said to him, "No," I said, "it's not happening." And he said, "You've been lecturing for parents for years, talking about, uh, you know, not passing on their responsibility to other kids and have their own lives and all these good things." And I said, "Yeah, but you're talking about my kid now, and I'm not ready." But as it happened, this is when Governor Ryan in Illinois was going out, and Goy was just coming in. I didn't know if my contacts were going to be the same, if I was going to have the same clout. We pulled the trigger. And as I tell people, it was like putting a knife in and twisting it and pulling it out, because you know that nobody is going to do for your kid like you do for your kid. They could be the greatest people in the world. It's not family, and you have guilt. People give you speeches all the time, but it's still a lot of tears. He did better than we did initially. Initially, he was coming home twice a week for a home visit. But a year later, we weaned down to one night a week when we were in town. Um, Before COVID, he was still coming home, one night a week. Uh, He started off in a large group home. Federal law says you could have up to 8 people in a group home, and he was in an 8-person group home. His own bedroom was a huge house, but it was too much, and he was having meltdowns and significant behavioral issues. So we got him into a 3-person group home, and as they say over at Clearbrook, he's like a different person. He did very, very well. He has his own bedroom, of course, the master bedroom with his own bathroom. So he moved in when he was 22, and he's turning 40 now. Problem is that he's outlived a lot of his housemates. He had some 55, 6-year-old individuals living with him, and he's had three housemates in these years that passed on. So dealt with that, and he's dealt with it pretty good. So again, he lives in a group home. He has uh, some really good, high functioning, for lack of a better expression, housemates. So he's the high maintenance guy, which is works out well for us. Before COVID, he worked in the community with an aide for a few days a week, and in a workshop for a few days a week. With COVID, we've been fortunate that one of his workers, one of his job coaches, when he used to be in the community, is with him during the day and does things with him. We bought a industrial shredder for his house, and he does shredding there. Of course, my office brings him shredding because they don't have enough shredding. Um, and and he has some really good staff that we take care of. Gift cards and things like that. We could talk about that later, but just you know, looking at some very unbelievably fantastic people they're working in the home, and just making sure that they're comfortable and they're happy because they're putting their lives out there. They're so I'm not going to labor that, except I'll jump in as needed. But I call it the parent's prayer. Let my kid with special needs have a long, healthy, and enjoyable life, but let my wife or I live one moment longer. We don't want anybody else taking on their responsibility because nobody's going to do what we do. But realistically, our child's going to outlive us, and we want the siblings to be siblings, not taking on the parent role. I'll do one plug for my other son, Benji. He's president, besides my partner in the firm, he's president of SIBS, which is a state chapter of a national organization of adult siblings called Sibling Leadership Network, and there's chapters in about 30 states. It's a networking of siblings to siblings, siblings in their 20s, siblings in their 60s, and I think David has the links to their websites, but I can always send it out too. It's a good resource, sibling to sibling, where they share information about their siblings and what's going on. So with that, I'm going to put myself on mute and let somebody else talk for a while.
Brian, thanks for that introduction. Very thorough and comprehensive. Paul Koza, the Zoom stage is yours.
Okay, well, I'm Paul Koza. I live in Libertyville, Illinois. I've been married 42 years. I have 4 sons. My son Brian is 37. He's married, lives in Columbus, Ohio with my 2 grandsons. And my son Kevin is 33 years old. And did I say my son Brian was 37? Yeah. And Kevin and Dan and Sean are triplets. Kevin lives in Charlotte, North Carolina with my granddaughters and his wife. And I had Dan and Sean. And Dan and Sean are both autistic. Brian is our special needs attorney, and we met Brian through our special needs financial planner. And these are all big things that are so critical when you have kids with anybody in life, but when you have kids with special needs, you got to have these resources to help guide you and help you understand. So fitting in kind of lock and key into Brian, we had these triplets, and I think I said this on the podcast in the summer. If you're married and you have multiples, the chance of getting a divorce are 50%. If you have a special needs child, divorce is 50%. And if you have triplets and they're 2 with special needs, you're married 42 years. So happily married for 42 years to my wife, Maureen. And taking the guidance of my planner and Brian, when the boys were really in middle school, we realized that long term we're going to have to do something. And we put together a concept, a plan. We knew that we wanted them in a small group home. We wanted them to live together. Their brothers, as Brian said, we didn't want their legacy to have to take care of them. We want them to be the executors, to give guidance, to have them as part of the family, but that they would live their lives in a group home. So we kind of followed this along, and Brian was rattling off all the governors that, were kind of shaky in this state. In addition, in the state of Illinois, there was a major lawsuit called the Liggis lawsuit, and that was trying to say that funding should not only be for somebody going into a large institution, but funding should be made available to individuals for group homes. And so it was called SILA funding. But and Brian could correct me on this. I think there's 200,000 disabled in the state, and 33,000 were on this list, and they were pulling 500 names a year. So my guys got enrolled in the PUNS funding lottery when they were 18. And it took 14 years for their names to be pulled. And they were only pulled after I had a chance to talk to the outgoing director of disabilities and asked her, where are they? We were in the dark for 14 years. They're 32 years old. We were hoping to get them in a group home. And she was under our past governor, who was going out the door, and she was trying to make some things happen. She changed it to a 900 person drawing, and she changed the categories. At the time my boys were on this list, it was crisis, critical, and emergency. And if anybody can really distinguish those three, you win the prize. So we asked her, I asked her personally, I said, where are my guys? I said, they enrolled when they were 18, and now at that time they were 32. And she said, I said, I don't even know where they're on the list. She goes, I know where they're at. She goes, they got 54 months on the list. I said, 54 months? I said, they've been on it for 14 years. She said, well, we enrolled them. They were on it for 3 years as critical. Then we put them in planning. And then we re-enrolled them, just 5 years ago or whatever, 6 years ago, to do the math. And I said, well, at least give them credit for the 3. That would be 90 months. And she said, you make a good point. And lo and behold, their names were drawn a year ago, or I'm sorry, 2 years ago, because they fit right in the middle of the list. So here we are, we get this PUNS funding. So now what do? Well, you wait for the letter that tells you you're going to get more funding. You're going to get the actual funding, and then you wait for the budget to be approved. So we looked at Clearbrook that Brian mentioned. We looked at Glenkirk. We were really frightened by some of the larger group homes with 8 members. And my wife and I had a vision that we could buy our own home. We had the financial means to do that if we could get an agency to staff it. So that's what our mission was, to find that agency. And we did. We found an agency called Active Visions out of Chicago, and they have 20 group homes. So a year ago, we bought a home. It's about 3 miles from our house. It's a 3-4 bedroom ranch. In order to make it function, my 2 guys are nonverbal. We added another autistic. He came from a family of 8 adopted, a fantastic family. And Joey was Romanian. They went to Romania and adopted him when he was only 2 with autism. And we said, okay, can he be the roommate? Well, you can imagine you have 3 nonverbals going into a house. That's a challenge. And then COVID hits. And we had our first caregiver hired in March. And because of COVID, we could never open the house. So all summer, I painted the house. I did cut the grass. The boys had sleepovers. Joey had a sleepover. And we were worried about our funding. The letter really said 6 months. So and all of our programs, the other thing I want to tell you is the reason we could do an independent home, they had day programs. They had a special rec program during the day and a day program at Center for Enriched Living. And they were going 5 days a week. So our whole plan was these programs have been in existence for 50 years. And they would supplement their daily activities while they were in the house. And then, of course, they'd have the weekends. So Activisions was ready to staff it. And the programs got shut down due to COVID, and they trickled back in the summer. So finally, October 5th of this year, we opened the house. The boys moved in. And as Brian said, it was gut wrenching. It was tearful. We were uncertain. And when you boil down the dollars that you receive from the state, it's about $13 an hour for the caregiver. So these aren't really highly, trained people, good hearts, wonderful people. We were running into situations where a couple of them worked at other houses. They got exposures, so they were being tested for COVID. We lost staff in the first couple of weeks due to that. So it was a real choppy thing. And a lot of these people had never been in a house with a totally nonverbal group of guys. And my guys are 6'3" or 6'2", 240, about 5'7", 220, and Joey was about 230. So you're not talking about little guys, but they were very docile, good guys, and they were just in shock. Their programs were blown up. They were in rooms with masks during the day, and at night they'd come home to these strange people in a different house. So it was a challenge, and things were bumpy all through the month of October. It started to get smooth in November, and the program shut down again. So we just had them home for 7 weeks, and we just opened up last week. So they're back at the house. And that part of it's going pretty well. The caregivers are on the list. We're all on this list hoping we get vaccinated. And then we got a call this morning that Joey had a temperature of 104. They weren't going to let him, 100.4, wouldn't let him in the program, or Dan and Sean. So they went back to the house. So this COVID thing is just, it's going to kill us all one way or another. But I'd be happy to talk about all the other aspects. I'm just going to close it. When we did the thing this summer, and for those of you who haven't had a chance, we did a podcast, or we did a group call like this summer on housing. And David asked at the end 3 questions. He said, you're dealing with 3 things: the physical part of the house itself, moving people in and getting them acclimated, the financial, and then the emotional. And I think throughout the talk tonight, those are the 3 things, like Brian already mentioned. The physical part, we identified our guys were relatively healthy. We found an old ranch house. It's just in great shape, and they're doing good. They could live independently with care. It has to be 24/7. Financially, making sure that you're in the state, Social Security, funds funding, disability trust, ABLE account, all these things that Brian's an expert at, we've got and we need. And then finally, emotionally, every day I hold my wife's hand when we go forward. Every day we try to make sure that we're working closely with the agency and not against the agency. And the agency works close with us, but sometimes they push us away, and sometimes, they're there. So that's my story, and I'd be happy to add any more comments as we go through the night.
Well, thanks for sharing. There's a lot there, and you obviously have 2 boys. They're 2 of a set of triplets going through the same thing. So it's at some level double the fun, if you'll allow me to say it that way. And one of the takeaways I think I heard you say was start early, right? It took you a long time, right, to come up with a solution if you're going to go through the state and with the resources they have to offer. So again, thanks for sharing. So let's switch gears and go to Special Fathers Network number 3 for tonight, who is also podcast dad number 54, Rich Gathro. Rich, the Zoom stage is yours.
Thanks, and thanks, David, for your leadership and vision. I have on my desktop a file that I call my aphorisms that I pick up along the way. The first one's not fancy, but I easily came up with it myself. It is, only fools think they're in control. Because especially when it comes to raising special needs children, you never know what's going to happen next. and it's been really true for us. We've been married 44 years, have two children. My son, Will, who's 36, cerebral palsy, and I have a daughter, 32, who was once highly functional, but developed brain cancer at age 10. And subsequent, she wasn't supposed to live, but she was a miracle. People prayed all over the world for her. Subsequent to that cancer, at age 21, she has stroke in the region that was radiated. So she has a variety of special needs herself, but she is more functional than my son and is married and lives near Atlanta. My son, Will, is living proof that you can't predict what's going to happen. When he was first diagnosed, the neurologist said, you have to be prepared for your son to be a vegetable in light of the CAT scan of his brain. But he has defied that. He is ambulatory. He's has to talk through his iPad, and has no use of his left arm, but he can walk, and he's bright in so many creative ways. My first words upon the pronouncement from the neurologist was, well, we come from a baseball family. That's another story. Well, you're telling me that I won't get to see my son play Little League, aren't you? And he said, yes. And I'd like to show you a picture of my shortstop, Will, when I coached his Challenger Division team. And we were living in Washington, D.C. We lived there 40 years, and he made the Washington Post. Children defy all the statistics all of the time. And one side just doesn't fit all. And I think that's really important to grasp. And you need to be prepared. You don't want to succumb to what Bonhoeffer calls wish dreams that can't be fulfilled. But on the other hand, it's just a delight to see life unfold for our children. And it's full of wonderful surprises. For instance, I would like to say my son's middle initials are ESPN because he loves watching a competitive checker game. I mean, it's amazing. But God winks. When God does wink, because a few weeks back, he was saying, my life doesn't matter. No one really cares about me. And he was in this funk. Part of the funk was that he got tossed out of his group home and back in with us. And he missed his group home. That's a whole nother story about being tossed out of a group home. He found out that a neighbor around the corner was the father of a Tampa Bay Rays ball player. So my son wrote him, said he'd like to meet the son. Next thing we know, there's a knock on the door, and it's this Tampa Rays ball player. And he, this particular player, Brett, had the walk-off hit where the Rays won a playoff game. And when he was being interviewed by the press, he said to the press, baseball is fun. And there are now T-shirts all over here in Florida with his picture on it saying baseball is fun. But his name's Brett Phillips, hands Will a baseball bat, autograph, says baseball is fun. And they had a good visit together, and Brett turns to us and says, I'm really drawn to Will. I'm really just drawn to him. Can I spend time with him? Of course, you really have to twist our arm to do that. And so Brett comes every week and they toss a ball back and forth in the backyard. He takes Will to batting practice. On Christmas Day, the phone rang and Brett says, "Say, could I bring my wife by? I'd like my wife to meet you all." I mean, so Will is just ecstatic. This ball player being Mr. ESPN, taking an interest in him, and it's just it's a precious gift. So there are a lot of moments of great discouragement, but there are just wonderful surprises that come along the way. We lived for 40 years in Washington, D.C., and moved here to Florida when I retired because Washington, D.C. is very expensive, and we could sell our house and buy something down here, pay for it, and have a lower cost of living because we want to have an estate. You know, when you have a special needs child, you really have to think about what your estate is going to be like, because this kid could live 50 more years. So we paid for a condo, but then Will got tossed out of his group home and had to move in with us. So suddenly in this little condo, we added a 160-pound son and a 60-pound service dog. And sometimes I think the service dog is bigger than Will. And so we've had to buy a house, so have a mortgage again. Life's just full of it surprises, and you're not in control. But there's so, if you just pay attention, there's a lot of delights along the way. And now we're looking for a group home again. And here in Florida, crisis, critical, emergency are words that fit very, very well. The Medicaid waiver list is as long as can be with thousands on it and so forth. But we have a sense that it'll work out, and we get discouraged, but we feel supported by friends and family. And again, God winks. When COVID hit, Will's physical therapist decided to set up a coffee clutch with all her special needs clients every morning at 9:30 through Zoom. And then at 4:30 in the afternoon, she led for all this free of charge, a workout for her clients. And so every morning, Will looked forward to coming on with all his friends from the workout class that he'd been developing. And through this physical therapist, the gift of her, we have a network of special needs families. And we support each other and look after each other and provide respite to each other and tackle the government bureaucracy together and so forth, just because of this woman who's connected us all. And now she and another physical therapist have rented space and created a gym and all kinds of classes depending on the varying special needs. So Will goes to class 3 days a week. And again, Will's an extrovert, and he has all these social relationships now. So, we can look through the glass darkly or recognize the bright spots that come along the way that these physical therapists are providing. So I just want to encourage all of you fathers, it ain't over. It's been a long road, but it ain't over as we search. Now, let me just add one more small thing about one size not fitting all. There are a lot of different housing options. I put them in 6 categories, but he was in this wonderful group home in Texas called Cornerstone for 10 and a half years. So for him leaving there, it was like a divorce. But he thrived there for about 9 years. But you know what? Our children grow at their own pace. And across those 9 years, he became more and more independent. And at about the 9th year, suddenly he was the independent one, and all the other residents in this wonderful place were very docile. And Will had his own, had in the course of those years, at a very slow pace, developed more of an independent mind. But where all the other residents did whatever they were told, he had his own ideas. And he wrote me one day, and he says, I'm incarcerated. So, and the fact is, he had outgrown the place, and it got to a point where he was so independent, wanted to be so independent, that they asked that he leave. And so that's why he moved back with us. But trying to find the right fit is difficult. I'm really interested in these sites where they have a lot of different options. There's a place in Texas called Marbridge, where they have the homes are based on abilities, medical care needs, so forth, how independent they can be. And there are places like that that, to me, are an idealist living situation where the fact is it's being addressed that one size doesn't fit all. You know, there are over 100 billion humans have walked the earth according to science, and no two are alike. Even identical twins aren't alike. And so plugging our kid in, there's just the right place is a great challenge. And so we're at the point here where he's having a great time living with us, but hey, I'm 73. We've got to figure something out. So we're not in a place where some of the rest of you are at this point, or where he'll be long term. We're in the search process, but we've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and we've learned a lot of the different arches. We're grateful for the arcs in the various states, and we've encountered some great places like Lamb's Farm there in Libertyville area. There's a lot of great places out there that are being raised up for our children. And I guess my main point is to you fathers, don't let discouragement overcome you. There are lights out there that will come on.
Well, Rich, I just want to say that was very insightful and inspiring. Another thought that came to mind is that life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. That's what I heard you say. So thanks again for your insights and your comments. So we're going to go to presenter number 4 tonight, who is Bruce Hearey. And Bruce is podcast ad number 121.
I'm struck by the variety of the experiences that you've all had. Mine is a little different. There are some similarities, but mine is a little different. My daughter, Jill, is now 36 years old. By all indications, the day she was born, she was perfectly fine. But because of some inattention by medical staff at the hospital she was born in, she was allowed to linger inside the womb several hours longer than she was capable of. And by the time she was born, she wasn't breathing, and they had to resuscitate her. And unfortunately, as a result, she suffered severe brain damage. At the time, this was my first child, my wife's second child. At the time, we didn't know, as you all probably have experienced with doctors and medical professionals, nobody wanted to make predictions about what the child was capable of. We didn't really know. In the early days, we were pretty hopeful that she might be mainstreamed, as they used to call it, that she'd be capable of going to school. And as you know about cerebral palsy, there are gradations of insult, as they say, and you can be severely affected or relatively minimally affected. And we were hopeful in the early days that Jill would be more in the minimal. But as it turned out, and as every developmental milestone came along, it became obvious that she was never going to be mainstreamed and that she was severely affected. Jill is a quadriplegic. She can't talk, she can't move, she can't eat. She's at the age of about 8, I believe. We had to do a procedure where she would be tube fed. She was very, needless to say, it was quite a challenge to take care of her in our house. There was something about her brain injury where if she wasn't being touched by a human being, she would literally scream. So you couldn't not be holding her. You couldn't put her down. It was very hard to put her to sleep. Her nerves and wires in her brain were all jangled up. My wife and I were recent transplants to Ohio from New Jersey. Like most New Jerseyans, we had an air of superiority that we were smarter than people in the Midwest. So we returned to New Jersey to get some advice about what to do about Jill. And we went to a place called the Children's Specialized Hospital in Mountainside, New Jersey. And we were advised that a place that was only a half an hour from us in Shaker Heights, Ohio, called the Hattie Larlam Foundation, was one of perhaps 5 places in the country, a residential facility where Jill could get round-the-clock care, round-the-clock therapy of all kinds. And we were fortunate that it was only 35 minutes from our house. My wife and I would like to have thought that we were the type of parents who were quite capable of keeping Jill in our house and taking care of her, but to be realistic, we had to admit to ourselves we weren't those type of parents. We just didn't have that kind of fortitude. So a couple of days after Christmas, when Jill was 2.5 years old, we took her to Hattie Larlam, and she's been a resident there for the last 32 years. Once upon a time, she was the youngest resident. Now she's among the oldest. She almost died a year ago. Typical of some of your experiences, she's confounded the experts who predicted she wouldn't live past the age of 14. She's now 36. Hattie Larlam has residential options. They have group homes. Jill has been in what they call a pod inside a large ICF MR facility of 120 beds. She's like the receptionist of the place. She knows everybody. Everybody knows Jill. She gets tremendous love and care. We can bring her home anytime we want to. And we do, not as much as we did when she was smaller, but we do. So there's all sorts of residential options there. But for us, the larger place was better for Jill than a group home because she was going to have more contact with people, and they're constantly taking her out into the community, taking her shopping, taking her to, God knows, bowling, movies, all sorts of things. So that's kind of the option that we opted for, and it's worked out very well for us. And we appreciate how lucky we are that a place like this is only 35 minutes from where we live, which is not true of people who live in a lot of other places. So that's my thing.
Bruce, thanks for sharing. Like you had indicated, everybody's situation is different. While there might be some similarities, you don't want to compare yourself to anybody. And, there's a lesson or lessons to be learned by networking or being in contact with others. So again, thanks for sharing. So our fifth dad,
David, I want to say one thing, David, though. I found myself as Brian and Paul and Richard were all talking, I did find myself comparing. And I think parents of special needs children do this in their honest moments. They go, oh, well, thank God I'm not as messed up as that family. Or geez, well, my kid's messed up, but oh my God, it's not that bad. And I remember in the early days with Jill, taking her places and looking across the room and saying, oh my God, thank God he's not as screwed up as that. And then it turns out I hear that kid wound up at Stanford and got a PhD. So you just never know.
I got to tell you.
I'm going to mute myself.
Brian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was saying, to piggyback on what Bruce said, is that being in the business of talking with families, 5, 6 families a day, it's like mini support group sessions. I would meet with families, and as Bruce just said, I would say, "Oh, I don't have it that bad. We don't have it that bad. Look at this family." Exactly. You start comparing and saying, "Well, it's not that terrible." Uh, and then, of course, then you meet the families. You're saying, "Boy, they got it pretty easy." But it's natural that you do that.
Thanks for the interjecting. So our fifth dad, who's agreed to share some of his thoughts, is Mitch Gardner. And I think you might remember that I had mentioned that the most recent episode of the podcast was 134. And Mitch is going to be known in the future as podcast dad number 150. So his episode has been recorded, but not yet edited and produced. So I really, really appreciate, Mitch, you stepping up and sharing a little bit of your story as well. The Zoom stage is yours.
I appreciate it. Had a little chance to introduce myself to some of these gentlemen earlier, and I'll tell you guys, I didn't know what to expect from this call, but I don't know that I, in just full transparency, expected to be so moved and inspired by some of you all's stories. So thank you for sharing. And it's not that I'm ignorant to the fact that there are so many folks out there that share many of the experiences that we all have on some level, but when you get to hear them firsthand and it's different, right? So I appreciate you guys sharing. So as I mentioned a little bit for those of you that was on the call or when we were first jumping on, Mitch Gardner, we're in Jacksonville, Florida. My wife, Ellen, who's really the saint and the angel in all of this. We will be married 16 years in 17 days. And we have my son, Davis, who's 14, who is impacted by profound autism, nonverbal, but is an extremely bright and intelligent typer. He's incredible. But then we have my lovely 13-year-old daughter, Drew, who's just a stud athlete, basketball, travel softball. She's awesome. And then we've got a little 5 and 7-year-old, Dax and Donnie. 7-year-old was not a surprise. 5-year-old was a surprise. So we're I was, like I shared with some of you, I'll be doing the math. When I'm 90, you can add it up. So I don't know, it's weird. But then we do have I shared, we have a foster daughter, Joanne, who's got a 4-year-old son who's 4 days older than my youngest, Donnie, and she actually works in the group home where my son Davis lives, which is incredible. And that's a whole nother story. Her mother took her own life when we were living in DC. And she happened to be our babysitter, and we took her in, and she was 15 at the time. And so that's a whole nother story. But so, you guys, some of you mentioned just the, we never thought we would have our son live in a group home. Never really was an option in our ignorant minds. That whole crisis, emergence, all those terms, Davis was definitely in a crisis. We were in a crisis state with Davis. He's 14, so he's also 6 foot tall. I don't know how much bigger he's going to get. He's probably going to get bigger in terms of girth, but 6'1", maybe 6'2", but he's going to be a big kid. And my wife, who's not a large person, with 2 little guys running around here, it became pretty unsafe because I travel a lot and I'm not home, and he's not aggressive when I'm here. But we needed to protect him and protect the family, and that day we'll never forget that day. So to back up just real quick, how we arrived there is in a unique, a little bit different, I think, situation than many of you have experienced, but I share, many reasons why my wife is incredible. But when we were living in Pittsburgh and Davis was diagnosed there at UPMC, he, she had a vision. We're very strong faith, for everywhere we were going, we were trying to find churches that just could not handle our circumstances. You walk into a church, you have a child with special needs, they are not equipped in most cases to certainly not handle someone who has extreme behavior. Not to mention, you go into these foreign places and you don't have a community to as some of you mentioned, to just talk about challenges and issues. And so that immediately God put that on my wife's heart that just shouldn't be the case with as many of these individuals that are out there. We just shouldn't be in the dark. We moved around, came back to Jacksonville, and as God would have it, in our church, she started what is called Special Nation. And it was 2 families at the time and turned into 50 families, pretty much all predominantly autism, those affected by autism. And then that birthed a school that's there on campus. We have the now group home was created. 2 of the individuals who are a little bit older than Davis, they lived in a typical residential group home, and they did not like the experience that they saw their children, their daughters going through. So they wanted to and had the means financially to create their own group home. So they were able to do that, and it's an incredible place. There's a farm on the front that is that the residents have the ability to work in. It is basically the community comes in and takes produce from this farm. I mean, it's fully functioning. It's incredible. It's incredible. There's animals on the back, and it's 2.5 acres. It's beautiful in Ponte Vedra, Florida. So that all was built with females in mind. And I was asked to be on the board, to chair the board by the woman that created it was the second family with my wife at the church for Special Nation. And so unbeknownst to me, they had 3 female residents. They wanted to go to 6. And we got a phone call from the woman who started it. And she said, we want Davis to be here. She knew what we were going through, dealing with APD, dealing with, the waiver, trying to find options for us. And she offered that and blew our minds. First of all, that she offered that to us. But secondly, the fact that we now had that to even consider as something that we just never considered. So anyway, that has all happened. He's been there now 2 years, which is just crazy. I'm sorry, he'll be there 2 years in June. And it's changed our lives. You guys know, you go through these crazy stages, and he's still 14. So he's got hormones and craziness. And I got a call today from the principal of the school, and they love that. They love our kid. They love our kid, but he is the problem in that school for them. And he strips naked. He defecates on the floor. He puts people in headlocks. But they love him. It is God. For those of you who don't have faith, I don't know how to explain it, but he is because when he's good, he is a special kid, and he has just an incredible impact on so many around him. So fast forward, my wife started that program. We moved to Atlanta. My mother and father-in-law kind of take it over with the church. We moved back, and just 5 months ago, with COVID and everything that was going on, my wife said, "You know what? I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to see about getting a job. I'm going to teach. I'm going to do something just to make sure we've got additional income coming in. You never know what could happen." And when you know it, someone sends her a job description, that literally reads exactly what she did for Special Nation, creating a ministry that is community for those within churches with special needs. And it was for the Tim Tebow Foundation. So she runs the the Shine On ministry that is the follow-on for Night to Shine, and that's in 2 weeks. Night to Shine. Some of your children may be going to that. It's Shine Through, or so it's a little bit different this year. But Shine On will be launched this year. So, when we think about, and there's so many aspects to everything you guys have shared, but the thing that I've learned from my son is that I mean, he's taught me so much more than I could ever teach him. And all of the things that we've seen, all the blessings, all of the impact, it is his struggle, his affliction is not in vain. He has had tremendous impact on so many people. He has changed lives, and he continues to change lives. There's no chance Shine On exists without Davis going through what he deals with. Special Nation doesn't happen. Some of these children that have learned how to type and communicate, it wouldn't have happened had we not gone through this journey. So, 2 Corinthians, it's, this light and momentary affliction. It's like, this isn't our home. And we always have to remind ourselves, my family, we talk about it all the time, is that one day I'm going to see my son again whole. I don't know what he'll look like. I don't know what he'll sound like. I don't know what how he'll respond. I don't know, but I'm going to get to see that one day, because this isn't our home. So that's my belief. That's us. You guys have inspired me to, I don't know. This was a nice surprise of a call, David. I don't know what I expected, but I'm grateful to be a part of this. So thank you. Thanks for listening.
Mitch, thanks for sharing, and a special call out to your amazing wife, Ellen, for introducing us and doing the work that she's doing. And each of you told a little bit of your story, just a highlight of it. And that's all we were looking for tonight, was to get just a little bit of an overview. And I had hoped to have time to go through a couple of rounds of questions. The first question I was going to ask, which is, what are some of the bigger challenges that you faced regarding your situation? And I think you've all indirectly, if not directly, made light of that. So we're going to forego that question, and I'll cut to the second question, which basically is two parts. So we'll just go round robin, try to be as concise as you can in light of the time. So the two-part question is, what advice can you offer a dad who's on the fence about pursuing housing or residential for their child at whatever age, right? We've heard a whole range of ages. And then secondly, what resource or resources can you suggest? Maybe in your own community or other resources that you're aware of, and we'll make sure that those resources get included into the show notes. So back to you, Brian.
Okay. Well, yes, to a lot of open-ended questions. First thing is, do what you think is the best thing for your kid, not necessarily for you, which is not always the same thing. I want to touch on one thing, and Mitch talked about it, a couple people talked about it, is one size does not fit all. And the problem I have, even though I'm past president of the ARC of Illinois, is the ARC's philosophy of really one size fits all. The group homes is. There are some amazing campuses in Illinois too. There's farms and whatever, and that's, you got to look what makes sense for your particular child. What makes sense, and it's not one size fits all, and it's not pigeonholed. And and special ed was a lot like they were saying everybody's got to fit into something, but when it comes to housing, it's what makes sense, and there should be the array of different options. What makes sense. That's one thing. Um, and just picking up on what everybody was saying, it's amazing how much similarity, even though the special needs are can be grossly different, but how much Mitch has, my Mitch, has educated other people, changed other people's lives. Um, School, the ignorance of people, not mean spirited, but just ignorance of special needs 30 years ago when he was in school, where they would have my daughter, may she rest peace, she would they'd have things at school, and she would bring she wanted like show and tell. She wanted to bring her brother for show and tell, but talking about it and the openness of special needs, that type of thing. Having Mitch go to the other kids' activities and people asking questions, seeing how much I see siblings all the time. They're much more sensitive and open and warm people. Maybe mature faster when they because they have to. Uh, it's I tell you, people talk about a blessing. I don't want to call it a blessing, but boy, you really start to appreciate what's important in life and what's not so important in life. And Mitch has done that for us and for the extended family. I look at my grandsons and watch how they deal with him and say, wow, they're going to be such better people, such better human beings, having grown up with their Uncle Mitch. It's really it's very rewarding and in several decades of doing this, I see the siblings going into those type of fields, be it medical or therapy or whatever, special education. A large percentage end up going into those type of areas. So I'm not sure what you're really looking for, but I'm going to let somebody else talk because there's a lot wiser people on this phone call than me.
Well, Brian, thanks for your humility. There are very few people that are as knowledgeable and in such a in-depth and broad fashion as you are with the 4 decades of experience that you have. So thanks again for sharing. And just to reiterate, what we're looking for is advice you can offer to that dad or that couple who's sort of anxious about this decision. Is it best to just hunker down and do the best you can at home? Or is there an opportunity that might be a good fit? What advice would you offer that young dad or that father or that couple for that matter? And if there's a resource or resources that you want to make reference to. So Paul, back to you.
There we go. Once again, and as all the other dads said, I'm always inspired on these calls by the strength and I'd say the beauty of these guys and what they've done for their kids. But so I'm thinking about this question, and Brian just triggered it for me. When my wife and I were thinking about our sons, we tried to think about the things that they like, and could we create a life for them? And we were, the one thing that we said, if we're going to get a group home, surround them in a group home, and we're going to do it more independently, we need to have organizations that they can really have for the length of it. So the Center for Enriched Living is an independent day program for adults. It has a variety of other facets. And then we're blessed in the county we live in with Special Recreation of Lake County, and they have a young or an adult program as well. So in those programs, as they go, it's not like we just send them there to spend the day, but we've been able to find out the things that they like. Sean, who was my lower functioning as a younger guy, has an incredible ability with art and just crafts. And the thing that's the funniest is he loves to do the laundry. So suddenly we move into this group home and he's bringing all the laundry down, and he did it at our house. I mean, God, when he's home for the day, you're going to do all the laundry no matter what, But I mean, there's just these little things that you start to see as they get older, and how can you craft things around that? So right now, as we were trying to get this house going, we wanted to make sure that they're going to have these extended programs. The one thing that my wife goes crazy is if they can't get to the program that day, if something is shut down, not because they complain, they'll just hang out. Sometimes I think they're like, hey, I need a day off too, but it's okay. So then you start to look, this is what you're going to see long-term. My wife and I looked long-term. We said, can we give them a normal life in the sense of a group home? Can we have them in a community? They right now live 3 miles from us, and the neighbors all know them already. And they've only had these 5 weeks there. But people have come over and we've introduced them, and then they're nonverbal. They're not really going to give you the big hi, but they're nice people, and people see that. So I think that's the first thing. What do you vision for them long term? Can you get them into an environment? I'm just loving these concepts. We looked at some of these community and group type things, and we couldn't really get ourselves with 2 guys into that mode. So it's the house right now that's kind of the center for them. But we went through a lot of those things, Mitch, that you went through. Dan's hormones kicked in at 18, and it was frightening. I was on the road a lot. It was frightening for my wife. He wasn't attacking her, but he was kind of attacking himself. It could have been, and he's outgrown that. And Sean, who was, like I said, the distance guy that we thought we might even put in ICF, has suddenly blossomed. And right now, the caregivers, like I said, we only got 5 weeks of kind of the 2 caregivers that are mostly during the day. They love Sean because he hangs out with them, and Dan's a little bit more recluse. But and then Joey, they're bringing this Joey into the mix. So I think the things I can say to the dads is, and resources are going to be a big thing. So what kind of resources can you plan for? Can you utilize to tap into? Make sure, in my opinion, you need a good financial planner. If you can tap into somebody like a Brian Rubin, who's not only going to be able to give you the experience of having a son with autism and special needs, but he has a complete handle on, the long-term trusts and how you look at your finances and how you are able to manage that. I have my sons as executors long-term in our wills, and they keep saying, Dad, we'll take care of the boys. And we said, no. It's not that you will take care of the boys. You're going to be executor. You're going to be the guardians. You're going to get them to Thanksgiving dinner. But we're going to try to set their lives up. And people say, well, geez, they're 33. Couldn't they be living with you? We said, life on this earth isn't guaranteed. And we did not want them to have to be a burden to their brothers and sisters. They would take care of them. But at the end of the day, I want them to live an independent life along with my other children and be a family. And that's kind of what we were creating. COVID is, like I said, spinning us off the track every other day. But, the beauty is I'm the landlord. So shovel of snow, I can see the guys, and, we get them home. And it's interesting what Brian said, bringing Mitch home 1 day a week. If you tell my wife that's going to be locked in stone. So I hope I answered a little bit of what you're looking for, David. I just think that the guys have so much talent kept in, and if you can create a life for them, where they can access that, it's great. And the other one thing I wanted to say is the special rec, they go through staffing changes, but these guys adapt, and these people love them. They really do love these guys, like Mitch's son. They really do love these guys. They care for them, and we learn from them. So we create this big communication network. How did it go today? What did you do? What would they like to do? And things like that. So that's what I got right now.
Paul, thanks for sharing. Lots of words of wisdom there. Rich, back to you. So what type of advice would you offer a dad or a couple who's thinking about residential situations outside the home? And if there's any resources that you might suggest?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, life is 99% about relationships. Everything else is just details. And why I say that is you need community. I was talking about this network of special needs families. We understand each other in ways others can't. And you just need that community. And related to that, do you have someone in your life, seek them out if you don't, who's kind of your father confessor. I have a friend who's a management consultant to Fortune 500 companies who wants me to come periodically, and talk to him, because there are dark moments. I need somewhere to go besides my wife where I can say the word shit. You know what I mean? Let's be honest. There are dark moments, and you need to think about having someone like that, where he knows you, loves you, trusts you, and is just willing to pull. We males, we suffer testosterone poisoning, and we don't want to express our emotions. But my wife is always kicking my butt about that I'm failing to express my emotions. But with this guy, I can do it, and it's so if you need a community, you need somebody you really can talk to, who understands your situation, and on a practical bit of advice is, if you're the administrator for your family, write an anxiety manual. What I mean by that is, I have Kathy has a copy, and I have it on my computer. It's called, my wife is Kathy's Anxiety Manual, and it is 8 pages, single spaced, and a couple of addendums. Okay, what you have to take hold of if I die. Here's how all the bills are handled. Here's where the wills are. Okay, I just want to remind you who is our attorney for our special needs trust and so forth. Here's the phone numbers. Here's the phone. Here's the accounts for all the utilities. Here's all the financial information. It's very practical, and it's her. Once I wrote that up, she started breathing easier, because she realized, what happens if you go, and I've got all this to handle. And she's so relieved that I wrote that up. So if you're the manager, write your wife an anxiety manual. That will make a difference. Mitch, your church walks its talk. I wish we were nearby. But what you've got there is community. What's the name of your church, Mitch?
It's called Redeemer Church in Ponte Vedra, Florida.
Okay. I mean, we could use a few more of those. It doesn't have to be a church, but could use
communities.
Yeah,
Yes.
those kind of communities.
Working on that. That's what Shine On. I encourage you to take a look, because that's exactly what my wife is trying to help create and give resources to folks that just like yourself and others. So
there's a church here, a Methodist church here in Largo, where we live. We don't go to that particular church, but a man just got a vision for this, and he created something called Handy Capable, and there's a party every Wednesday night. And if there isn't something like that you'd plug into, and then there's a woman here in town whose brother is mentally challenged, and she saw how lonely he was, and she started a group called HUG, HUG, which stands for Help Us Gather. And once a month, she's raised money, and she puts on a social event like Night to Shine or whatever. I mean, they have actually once a year a kind of a prom for all these special needs folks, adults, but they'll have a before COVID they had movie nights, and because your special needs son or daughter can be potentially one of the loneliest people you will ever meet. Uh, so if there isn't any kind of those social gatherings available to you, start one. It doesn't have to be expensive. I think Help Us Gather, Hug, it's a great idea. Once a month, have an event uh, because these folks want to connect socially. Last comment, I just want to take off on a theme here. I learn as much from my son as he does from me. I worked on Capitol Hill for 40 years in DC. And Washington, DC its middle name is ambition. Power, another name is power, very educated. Everybody takes themselves too seriously. All the showboaters and everything else. And you can really get caught up in all that. And I discovered after a short time with my son, and as he got into 5 and 6 and 7 years old, I suddenly had all these friends on Capitol Hill that were street people. We knew each other by our first names, and I'd come by my office and do chores and paid them, had him wash my car regularly, things like that. And we became friends with all these. I had half a dozen street people friends on Capitol Hill. And all of a sudden dawned on me, these are the guys that I walked by for years and ignored. And I realized what happened here. It was my son. He taught me to see the soul instead of the academic credentials and position. My son taught me to see the soul. And it's the greatest gift I've ever gotten in my life. Was that from him. So don't underestimate what your children will teach you. It's called image bearing. Every human being bears the image of God. He taught me to look past, and no matter how screwed up a person is, to look past and see their soul. And I owe that to him, not to my brilliance. So that's something I want to alert you to, how much no matter how, here I have a nonverbal son, but he's taught me so much.
Thanks again for sharing. Bruce, we're going to go back to you.
Yeah, I think in terms of advice, I think no matter whatever decision you make about a residential option for your child, there's every possibility that you're going to feel guilty about it, that you're going to feel it's not quite right, that perhaps you should keep them at home. And I think that's par for the course. And I think you just have to trust that you're doing the best thing you can for your child and for your family. And you can't listen to the naysayers out there who may make judgments. By any definition, Hattie Larlam Foundation, where my daughter is a traditional 140 bed ICF MR. A lot of people would call it an institution. And if I got all caught up on that, then I'd feel really guilty about it. But I also know that it's an incredibly caring, loving place. And when I go down there to visit and I see all the caregivers come in and the way they interact with my daughter and the way she responds to them, I'm reassured that that's the best decision I could have made. And I think that's another thing that's kind of a hallmark of this. It's fascinating to see the people that come into your child's life that see them in a way you may not see them, and see them differently and appreciate them in a way you may appreciate them, but they appreciate them in a different way. And I always think that's extremely reassuring. In terms of resources, I've never been afraid to talk about my daughter and our situation, her circumstances of her birth and what happened. And I find the more you talk to people, the more you educate people about people with disabilities. So I've never hesitated to talk to people. And I think when you talk to people through word of mouth, you also find out about resources. I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't think you can count on doctors or the medical profession to give you the best advice about your children. They seem reluctant to do that. Doctors are trained to help people and fix people. And sometimes with children that theoretically can't be quote unquote fixed, they're kind of powerless and they really get tongue tied about advice. We got a lot of advice from the local chapter of United Cerebral Palsy about Hattie Larlam. And I also found out inadvertently through a client of mine who had who knew a parent that also had a child at Hattie Larlam. And we were so lucky because Hattie Larlam is perhaps one of 10 places in the country that provides the kind of services that they do. And just one thing about divine intervention, when we took Jill to Hattie Larlam, the idea was that it was only for children. And supposedly when you were 14, you were going to get kicked out. And the option for a 14-year-old severely disabled child was essentially a nursing home. And then they raised the age level to 18. So that bought us 4 more years. And then they eventually said, you know what, we're just going to keep these kids here as long as they live. And so now my daughter's 36 and she's one of the older ones, but you know, she's not the oldest and she could stay there as long as she lives. So there are some well-meaning people out there that want to get rid of large facilities like where my daughter lives because they think they know what's best for my child, but they've never met my child and they don't appreciate that your child may thrive in a group home. Jill's not going to be happy there, trust me. And so what works for you may not work for me. So keep your opinions to yourself, disability groups. So that's my advice.
Bruce, thanks again for sharing. I appreciate the wisdom about not one size fits all, and you know what's right for me might not be right for you, or vice versa, for that matter. Mitch, to go along with the baseball theme, you would be batting cleanup even though you're in the 5th spot here. So back to you, Mitch.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just quickly, I think you guys have all said had great advice. I kind of like Bruce the lane you were running down, and I attribute that same advice even to just families who are new to a diagnosis of autism in particular. And for those of you that have been doing it a long time, you know, the World Wide Web was not necessarily what it is today back when you guys were first introduced to autism. And unfortunately, it is the devil today because it can send you down a rabbit hole so quickly. And even in 2007, 8, when we were just introduced to what was going on with Davis, it was not good. So I say all of that because while there are a zillion resources out there, many of them give you a ton of reasons why not to put or consider a group home for your child. Unfortunately, a group home, a facility, whatever you want to call it. And so what I would recommend is that, you know, using the word ignorance, you know, not again, Brian, in a demeaning way, but in just a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge or perspective or experience. Be careful in jumping to conclusions about anything, and keep an open mind and know that. Let me look. Here we are, all of us dads that have chosen to go down this path with our children, not necessarily happily, but in most cases kicking and screaming to some degree. But we have had good experiences, and in some cases great experiences. And more importantly, our child or children have even thrived or are thriving today as a result of that decision. So I would just say, as hard as it is to be open-minded when it's in such an emotional decision, the judgment, people's families. I mean, there's so many things that come into play, society, all that stuff. I love, Richard, just the things you were talking about with community, because oftentimes the people that are the most encouraging are those that actually know what the heck's going on. You know, those that have actually dealt with it and gone through it are typically the ones that would say, yeah, you should consider that. I think it's wise. And so anyway, I hope that helps, David. As far as the resources, I'll be honest, as I shared with our story, we weren't looking, we weren't seeking. God put it in our lap. So I'm not a good resource in that regard. I think, man, there are some incredible people on here that have, there's 3 or 4 of you that people don't need to go anywhere else. You're the Encyclopedia Britannica of resources relative to this space. So I don't think I could add anything of more value there, but hopefully that helped.
Mitch, thank you for those remarks. I just want to say thank you to all the Special Fathers Network Mentor Fathers for their participation this evening. For more information about each of their stories, you can check out their podcasts at the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast on any of the popular podcast platforms. And for additional information on the 21st Century Dads, the Special Fathers Network, you can go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thanks again. We hope to see you at one of our future programs as well.